It is December 5th, 2024, and apparently it's not enough to just refer to the Islamist extremists, jihadists, whatever latest edition of Al-Qaeda at the moment is in Syria. It's not enough to just refer to them as rebels. Oh no, the Western media has now taken on the mission of rebranding them as diversity friendly, right? They're claiming that the new head of HTS, the rebranded version of Al Qaeda, which is literally classified as a terrorist organization by the United States, that now HTS is woke and they're just seeking mercy and love. And I'm like, I'm watching this going, are people actually buying this? I know that there are some people out there that are, but how shameful to be a member of the mainstream media right now, to be selling this narrative that, oh, not just these are the rebels, right? And you should support their cause because they're fighting against what we are claiming is an evil dictator. Not just that, but to claim that they are somehow diversity friendly. The woke version of Al Qaeda is something that I honestly never thought that I would see. Did not have it on my 2024 bingo card. And yet, here we are. But then the bigger question is, what does this mean for Syria, for the ongoing proxy conflict, a number of proxy conflicts really that are happening there that are benefiting the US, Israel, and Turkey right now? How much involvement are we going to see from the Syrian government, from Iran, and from Russia in fighting back against this latest offensive? And just how far will that offensive spread? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Patrick Henningsen, a journalist, geopolitical analyst, and host of the 21st Century Wire. Patrick, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for the invite. Great to be with you, Rachel.
I'm glad that I get to talk to you today. I know that there's a lot going on, but the latest updates coming out of Syria are that the Syrian army has announced its withdrawal from the central city of Hama after fierce fighting with the jihadist groups there, which includes the latest edition of Al-Qaeda. Now, I know that you were actually on the ground in Syria covering the conflict back in 2017, and it has seemed like, at least for the past, 4 years, that things have kind of quieted down there. So were you surprised by the latest resurgence of Al-Qaeda, and how do you see the current tensions in Syria?
I think everybody's surprised. I mean, it's something that has always been on the back burner, and some journalists predicted it months ago. And Kevork Almassian, who everybody knows from Syrian analysis, he warned about it on September 30th. And then other journalists I saw from the region were talking about this back in June and May, that the forces were building up in Idlib, which is the northwestern province very close to Aleppo. That basically became the Islamic State. That became the caliphate that ISIS never managed to get in Raqqa and Mosul back when ISIS was, on the rampage. They weren't successful, but they actually did get their Islamic State, and it's called Idlib. It's within Syria, and so it's an Al-Qaeda occupied province. Basically, it's terrorist occupied. They have the full support of the Turkish government, ostensibly NATO, the United States, the UK, full support. The so-called rebels, they call them. They're led by a designated terrorist group. HTS. Hayat Tahrir-al-Sham is a rebrand of Al-Qaeda in Syria and al-Nusra. They did that to escape the criticism at the time. So they kept rebranding. This is a trick that was being played on the Western public and the people in the Middle East. And so here they are, their leader, the caliph, al-Jolani, the understudy of al-Baghdadi himself. And they're trying to basically rebrand him as a democratic reformer, as a diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just like the rainbow face of Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's just so over the top, the Zelensky style Hollywood makeover they're giving him. So they have plans to create a parallel government in Aleppo. So they've stolen and terrorists have occupied Syria's second largest city, Aleppo, 2 million people. So they've taken that. Syrian army surrendered or left, fled, retreated. We're still trying to work out what has happened there. Then in 8 days, the Syrian military have basically given away Aleppo and Hama, two major cities in Syria. And The fear is that the terrorists will move on to Homs, a really strategic city there, and if they do, they will effectively cut Damascus off from the sea, and then you have a potential siege of Damascus down the road. Is this what's going to happen? Because this did happen before the previous war. And Syria had to fight back with the help of the Russians and the Iranians to regain territory, but they never fully regained all their territory. If you look at the map of Syria, you'll see Idlib is al-Qaeda occupied with the support of Turkey, NATO. Israel acts as the al-Qaeda's air force. They've done about 200 airstrikes up until this point in 2024 and strategically hit Syrian army positions. They say they were hitting Iranian targets in Syria. This is what Israel said. What Israel's really been doing for the last 10 years with thousands of these airstrikes is they're basically acting as al-Qaeda's air force and aiding the United States. Meanwhile, the United States is occupying northeastern Syria. 25 to 30% of Syria's landmass is illegally occupied by the United States and their Kurdish SDF militia proxy forces. And the United States is doing that in contravention of every international law, and nobody's pushing back on it. Israel's occupying the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory as well. So this is why Syria is at war with Israel for decades now. So 3 different foreign countries are occupying Syrian territory. Turkey, actually 3 countries and a non-state actor, Al-Qaeda. So Turkey itself is military occupying parts of northern Syria. They plan to take territory away from Syria. The United States is planning to do the same by establishing a Kurdish state there, which will be a U.S. proxy. And Israel is planning to permanently steal, with the help of the United States, the Golan Heights area. And Al-Qaeda is now moving down, and they will become a proxy of Turkey, effectively, in NATO. So this is think of Al-Qaeda in Syria, or HTS, or whatever they're calling them this week. Think of those as a non-state extension of NATO and that block of countries, because that's effectively, and Israel as well. Strategically, this is great for Israel, because Israel, the United States, have always wanted to break up Syria into 4 or 5 separate statelets. And in this week, they have already now established 1, 2, 3 statelets are now in formation. So the breakup of Syria is now happening. The question is, what's Damascus going to do? What's Moscow going to do? And what's Iran going to do? Can they do anything at this point? Is going to be a very ugly war if fighting intensifies, and it's going to take a lot. The question is, will they be able to mount a counteroffensive before they lose Homs, key city in Syria? That's the big question.
Yeah. Oh, I'm right there with you. And I appreciate you explaining it, because I know that when you look at the current map of Syria and kind of who is in control, it's interesting to see how over the last few years, we really haven't talked about Syria as much. We haven't talked about the fact that there hasn't been much of a shift. Obviously, you had that 2020 ceasefire deal between Russia and Turkey, in which basically Russia and Syria as well, the Syrian government said, okay, we're going to leave Idlib be. We're not going to mess with that. Well, the result of that is that when you have a frozen conflict, it is bound to unfreeze at some point. Now you have this resurgence of Al-Qaeda. Now, I will say one thing that has surprised me about this. I mean, I remember the good old days of the so-called moderate rebels that the Obama administration championed. And at the time, it was their way of rebranding it, right? They're like, yeah, don't worry about al-Nusra Front or ISIS. No, we have our own quote unquote moderate rebels who just happen to have the exact same goal as all of these other groups. Don't worry about it. Now, the new version, as you were noting there, is that Al-Qaeda is now diversity friendly. Literally, the Telegraph is reporting this. And it's like, just in case anyone gets concerns about the fact that you have these jihadist groups openly targeting Syrian Christians and other religions in the region, just as they have been doing for a number of years now. Don't worry about it. They're diversity friendly. Their new head, Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, he's here to spread a message of mercy and love. I mean, is this the point that we're at in 2024? How do you see the way that the media has been working overtime to not just bring back the rebels, but to now bring back, oh, these are, good woke rebels in a way.
Well, this is just a kind of continuation. They had a great PR campaign in the first decade of the dirty war on Syria from 2011, which is absolutely what it is. So many countries involved in the destabilization of Syria, leading countries: the United States, Israel, Turkey, the UK, France, Holland, Germany, basically all of NATO, and Jordan from the south provided staging ground for terrorists to attack into southern Syria. Turkey provided the staging ground from the north. And then eventually the U.S. occupation allowed ISIS to still exist in Syria. ISIS is basically being ready to be let off the leash by the United States, and it will happen at the opportune time. And this is really interesting because, and I'll come back to your previous point, Rachel, but if you look at the incoming Trump administration, Donald Trump, hangs his hat on the fact that he claims he defeated ISIS, which is patently ridiculous. The United States didn't defeat ISIS in 2017. All the fighting on the ground was done by Iraqi militias, the Iraqi army, Iranian special forces, Hezbollah. So they did all the heavy lifting. The United States did a lot of scorched earth airstrikes against Mosul, Raqqa, killed a lot of civilians as well, some of whom have yet to be recovered from under the rubble in some cases. So think of Gaza, you can understand the scale of the destruction, or Fallujah. But with the return of ISIS would provide the Trump administration with the perfect excuse to re-escalate in the Middle East, and to do so with some legitimacy, because the Israel-Gaza genocide situation has been a total PR disaster for the U.S. globally and for Israel, for Republicans who are very hawkish against Iran, not so hawkish against Russia. Democrats more hawkish against Russia. So with the new administration, this would be the perfect narrative for them, is to sort out Iran on behalf of Israel, and ISIS would be the excuse. So in a way, the U.S. will want to get involved in the war on terror after basically arming, backing the terrorists. Al-Jolani himself, the head of this HTS, was al-Baghdadi's understudy, protege at Camp Bucca in Iraq. And then the United States let him out with bags of cash to go to Syria to create the next mayhem and strife. And he did, and they're still backing him now in the media. So this PR job they did the White Helmets PR job. The White Helmets are a pseudo NGO funded by USAID, a known CIA front. USAID funded the White Helmets, founded by Western intelligence agencies, managed by military intelligence from NATO, and more of a PR outfit. And the White Helmets search and rescue videos, you saw them on CNN, the BBC, Sky, and those were for two things. One was to delegitimize the Syrian government. So by creating these very well produced, glitzy videos, they'll say Assad's barrel bombs, we're rescuing the babies, dusty babies and everything like that. And so the Syrian regime, quote, is illegitimate. And they kept running these. These were also found to be the most effective recruiting tool internationally for terrorist fighters from around the world to come and fight the good fight against the evil Bashar, who is bombing the children. Look at the White Helmets videos. And so it's in the same way how they recruited the international brigades to fight in Ukraine against the evil Putin. So you see how they collected all these volunteer fighters? It's the same system, basically. This is actually an old system. It goes back to the Spanish Civil War, the international brigades concept. Fight the good fight against fascism. And that was the prelude to World War II. And it was basically, Spain became a hive of 100 different countries sending people there. And they were also getting experience for the war that was about to begin in Europe, including the German Air Force. in the Spanish Civil War. So you can see history has some parallels here. And so all this public relations makeovers and Zelensky style green T-shirts and all this stuff they're doing to normalize Al-Qaeda has a very specific purpose. And if Syria goes to retake Aleppo, they're trying to delegitimize any effort by the legal UN member state, Syria, to retake territory. That's what this is all about. So you'll see all of the reports. CNN has teams in there as we speak. All the Western media are already in there. There's NATO specialists moving in. There's foreign fighters from all around the world. They've opened the floodgates for what you're calling jihadists. I think probably a better term would be like a takfiri, Al-Qaeda terrorist. There's so many different terms we could use, but the floodgates are open, basically. And so this is going to become a real issue. And we're looking at right now a protracted, painful conflict. If Syria decides to retake Aleppo with the help of Russia and its allies, the city will be once again devastated. And there will be many civilian casualties, because what we saw the previous war, what I witnessed myself on the ground in East Aleppo, was residents' testimonies of being used as human shields, not being able to leave by Al-Qaeda that was occupying East Aleppo. They wouldn't allow residents to leave because they told the residents, if you leave, then the Syrian government and the Russians will crush us. We need you as human shields. So this is well known from the entirety of this conflict, but this was whitewashed by the Western media. It was only a few independent journalists like myself and other colleagues at 21st Century Wire, Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, and others. There's only a handful of Western journalists, independent journalists from the Middle East, from Europe, from the US, that actually did reports a lot of these things. This was verboten in The Guardian, not allowed to talk about these things. In fact, we got attacked by The Guardian and by Western media outlets and put on blacklists and Russian disinformation lists because of our reporting against exposing the fraud of the white helmets as a Western-backed propaganda construct. And also just basically telling the truth and talking to actual people in Syria. That was enough to get you persecuted by the censorship industrial complex, which was exposed in the Twitter files. I was one of the first targets of that back in 2017. And I was in the Twitter files, by the way. And it was my work on Syria that got me in the Twitter files on the Hamilton 68 radar to basically blacklist, shadow ban, get me deplatformed and everything else during that period. So 21st Century Wire, our website, was heavily directly targeted in DDoS attacks, deranked, delisted on Google. All of these things happened because of our Syria coverage during that period.
Wow. And yeah, it's so interesting to think back to it now. And I'm glad that you bring that up, just how, because we have to remember, I know that when it comes to kind of overall big tech censorship, it's always the thing of the moment, right? And now we get into that place again where we're looking at, okay, is Syria going to be the thing of the moment? Obviously, even with all of the ways that you were targeted, they have not been able to just completely shut you up, right? You're still here. You're still talking about Syria. You're still going to be speaking out, as well as a number of the journalists that you mentioned there. And when I look at kind of where this goes from here, it's really interesting, the element to me of Turkey, the role that they've played, as you were noting earlier, and the fact that you have Turkey in this place of trying to act like they still have good relations with Russia. You know, you have Putin and Erdogan on a phone call, you have Turkey kind of trying to play the middle ground in a number of different ways. But the reality of it is that they've played a very important role in Syria in getting us to the point that we are now with the current violence, with all of the ways that they have helped the extremists on the ground. And so when I look at where this goes from here, and I know that as US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan mentioned this week, he was like, hey, I mean, yeah, we view HTS as a terrorist group, but we're not going to cry if they're quote unquote putting pressure on the Syrian government, on Russia and on Iran. And he's also mentioning the fact that Russia and Iran were quote unquote distracted by other conflicts which the US is directly involved in. So how do you kind of see this evolving? Do you see Turkey, rather, excuse me, actually taking a side here or continuing to try to play this ridiculous middle ground?
Well, Turkey, I think, has left the middle ground, and they've gone all in for basically the forced breakup of Syria. And Turkey, in a certain way, is coordinating with Israel on this. Israel's providing the airstrikes, Turkey's providing the ground support for Al-Qaeda. And so they are absolutely working together with the United States, probably with the UK, other NATO member states are all involved in backing what they call the rebels. See, in the mind of the Western military mind and political mind, these are rebels, and they need to get regime change in Syria. They need to pressure, and the country needs to be broken up because it's too big and it's potentially too powerful and too much of an Arab nationalist country to be allowed to exist next to Israel. This has always been the U.S. agenda. You go read U.S. foreign policy from Dwight Eisenhower to the present. The United States always regarded, during the Cold War, mind you, during the Cold War, a bigger threat than Soviet communist influence in the Middle East was Arab nationalism and pan-Arabism. And you see this throughout when you study foreign policy of successive U.S. administrations and their advisors, looking at their writings and so forth. It's always been a big threat. For Israel, this was always a big threat. It's very easy to control the Gulf monarchies because you just deal with one point of contact. It's a privileged caste in the region. They're very wealthy and they want to maintain their privileged position as oil barons or gas barons. So it's always been very easy for the British and the Americans to manage the region with Gulf Emirates and Israel, but to always suppress and to destabilize and to break up any potential Arab nationalist or pan-Arabic governments or movements that might ally with each other, that might merge as countries, which Syria and Egypt did merge at one point in the late 50s and early 60s. This has always been something. So Turkey has its own ambitions, similar to pan-Arabism. Their ambitions are neo-Ottomanism. So Erdogan's transitioning from a secular Kemalist Turkey, the Kemalist secular after the Ottoman Empire fell, so to an Islamic state, or bring Islam to the center of Turkish politics and civic life. And so if you listen to Erdogan's speeches, he's even said, and we posted this on 21st Century Live, a very good archive on Turkey. And he says, Aleppo is ours. We're going to regain Aleppo there. They've already taken territory from Syria and Hatay through previous Sykes-Picot era agreements after World War I, has stolen Syrian land. And this is Western powers that brokered that, by the way. So Turkey still sees parts of northern Syria as theirs. It's part of their Ottoman heritage. And I think Aleppo is one of those cities. So it's no surprise what we're seeing here. So Turkey is not, and people will have a go at Russia because they're saying, well, I thought, what does Russia think about its friend Turkey now? You know, they're like waiting for Russia to throw a tantrum and tell off Erdogan. It's not going to happen because there are no friends or enemies at that level, because Turkey controls access to the Mediterranean. And that was actually an argument that was on the table in the early part of the Ukraine conflict, if you remember. And so Turkey played a very neutral role, and the quid pro quo for that was that Russia would allow Turkey some leeway with what's called its security interests against the PKK and securing areas of northern Syria by military. So it's a very delicate dance, and they signed something called the Astana Agreement in 2018, which I covered. And also when I was in Syria at the time, I was also reporting on that at the time. And think of the Astana Agreement. It was a ceasefire agreement, which Turkey has lied about. And Russia's criticized them for playing fast and loose with the facts on this. So Turkey just used the Astana Agreement to buy time, to arm and Al-Qaeda and NATO powers to get Al-Qaeda up to a standard to prepare for the Tet offensive, which we have seen this week. And what does that remind you of, Rachel? Using an agreement to buy time, to arm an extremist faction, the Minsk Accords.
I was going to say, it takes me right back to Minsk and everything we've been through with that.
Same thing. And so in Ukraine, it was to back the extremist Ukrainian nationalists and to empower the Azov battalion and the Nazi elements. This was the Western NATO role there during that 8 years of sandbagging by the French and the Germans. So, I mean, Russia's a guarantee of the Astana Agreement. Iran should also play a role. They're part of that agreement. But it's hard to get compliance from a country like Turkey when they have this whole other agenda that they're running in the background, which you can't really do a whole lot about because they're just denying that they have any role in terrorism, when the evidence of Turkey's role in destroying Aleppo, their manufacturing sector, running ISIS oil through Turkey, running oil to Israel during the genocide from Azerbaijan, while publicly Erdogan saying we're against Israel and this will not stand and Israel's evil and all this stuff. Well, they helped Israel on many different material levels, even at the height of the genocide. So there's a lot of rhetoric, but when it comes to action, what is Turkey? What are they really prepared to do against Israel? And all of their rhetoric against stopping terrorism is almost laughable at this point. They provided the safe haven for these groups to accumulate in 2010 and 11, then to invade over the Syrian border, then back to Idlib after Astana, and now they've facilitated the latest blitzkrieg of Al-Qaeda in Syria. I mean, this is how the history books are going to read this. And whatever the denials are of the Turkish government and the Erdogan administration at the moment, they're not going to be able to escape the facts on this. And I think it's going to actually, there's going to be another refugee crisis as a result. Now, Turkey believes that they're alleviating a refugee crisis by allowing refugees in Turkey to come back to northwestern Syria, to Aleppo and to some of these places. That's what the propaganda from Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye are pushing right now, is families reunited. They're staging all these warm videos of people hugging. But this masks a reality of absolute sectarian division that was promoted by ISIS, Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda, by Turkey, by NATO, by Israel as well. All the Western countries and their apparatuses, the media apparatus, they promoted that vicious sectarianism that forced a lot of these people who had taken sides and taken sides with the groups that took up arms against the Syrian government, that created the civil war to begin with. They were forced to flee the country because of their role in the destabilization of the country. That's why the people became refugees, and they were given automatic asylum in the West if they were against the Syrian government, against Assad. That's immediate asylum. So if you just say that so that was also, there's a lot of pressure there. And if you talk to refugee workers, which I have in Lesbos in Greece, who were on the front lines of the migrant crisis in 2015 and 16, that was a direct result of the Syrian conflict. They'll say that it was not allowed to say anything neutral about the Syrian government in those camps. And there was a reason for that, because these refugees knew that that was their ticket into Europe without any hassle. You had to be against the Assad regime. That was an absolute requirement politically. So, I mean, that's the reality of some of these issues like migration, war, geopolitics. And this is what the right-left debate never addresses, is these are the real underlying issues. Same in America with the Venezuelan refugees. That's a geopolitical issue of the Biden administration giving asylum to 300,000 plus Venezuelan refugees with a wave of a wand. That was a geopolitical decision for the U.S. to get them loyal to the United States, to build a fifth column in the U.S., a Venezuelan opposition in the United States, which they can deploy in different ways in the future. The U.S. have done this, the British do this, the French do this throughout history. This is an imperial game. And so we're just seeing another version of this today. So I think it's important. I always try to tell people, pay attention to these details, because they mean a lot. And you can almost predict the trajectory of the conflict if you look at what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And it is interesting to me too how we keep going through this same process over and over again. But as you're noting there, I mean, the US and the West, they have this blueprint. They specifically target whatever extremist group it is at the moment in whatever country they are targeting. And they also spread the propaganda far and wide. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I also appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest, to kind of give us some context and explanation that so many in the media are refusing to talk about right now. Patrick Henningsen, a journalist, geopolitical analyst, and host of the 21st Century Wire. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive deep dive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also catch Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.